Hi, everybody. I'm rational, reasonable, secular humanist Bill Whittle, a man of deep intelligence and wide education. Here with my partner, religious nut job, Andrew Klavan.
Hallelujah.
Yeah. Okay, so, Jesus freak, let me ask you this one. It's got to do with people riding dinosaurs. No, but in all seriousness. Question comes to us from Digging for Information, and it's a profound question, maybe the most profound question, really, because this is a deep, deep, deep subject. And they ask, why are science and religion viewed as matter and antimatter? Are not both sustained by faith and belief?
Yes, and it's a really good question, and it has a historical answer. I mean, there's a reason. First of all, after the Reformation, there was a lot of motivation to depict the days before the Reformation as kind of the Dark Ages, and that's where it's at the Renaissance that the term Middle Ages comes into vogue, because they're saying, you know, oh yeah, there was Rome, and then there was this kind of dark Middle Ages, and now there's us, and of course it wasn't true. This was a time of like great exploration, tremendous acts of logic and advance and understanding of things, and it's where science basically grows out of. You know, science only grows out of Christendom. That's where it comes from, and when they moved, you know, through the Darwinian age and all this into the late 19th century, it became an open topic. Were science and religion at war? And somewhere in the late 19th century, the 1870s, somebody wrote a famous book called it had a name like The Conflict Between Science and Religion. And the book is full of, you know, it depicts the world of the church as very anti-science, and it, you know, does that whole Galileo story and all this. And it's not really an honest book. I mean, maybe it was honestly done. Maybe the guy didn't intend to be dishonest, but it's not a factual book. In fact, the church was very supportive of a lot of scientific exploration. The misstep with Galileo, and it was a misstep, was not really about you know, questions of science. It was just about questions of doctrine, and Galileo was kind of a loudmouth, and he played his cards politically badly. Still a mistake on the part of the church, but the church had never been against, and religion had never been at war with science. Newton was a believer. Newton was a, you know, Unitarian Christian, yeah, and when they depict in movies, in a recent movie, they depicted Darwin losing his faith because he discovered evolution. He didn't. He lost his faith because he lost a daughter. A child died, and he couldn't get over it, and he couldn't understand how God would allow that kind of suffering. And, you know, the fact is that science has always been imbued by faith. As Digging for Information points out, you know, you have to have faith that your observations have some kind of bearing on reality, that math has some kind of bearing on reality. Oddly enough, Eric Metaxas wrote a piece about this recently, and it's really true. Oddly enough, as science continues and as it gets past those first kind of clockwork stages of finding out how how this gear turns that gear, God is kind of coming back into the fore. There's a lot of questions that can't be answered without coming up with what I call science of the gaps. You know, science used to accuse Christians of having a God of the gaps, that anything that couldn't be explained, they would say, ah, see, well, now that's proof of God. And of course, that was a bad strategy, because science would always fill in those gaps. But now there's a science of the gaps. For instance, there's something in science called the anthropic principle, which is the fact that the universe uncannily is constructed to create an intelligence that can understand it, and the math required for that, the razor's edge of probability on which the universe is built, is very hard to imagine by accident. It's something like the chance of a wind blowing through a junkyard and assembling a 747. And so science has had to pose the science of the gaps, where they'll say, well, maybe there are many universes, and this just happens to be the one that created life. There's no proof of that. There's no evidence of that. That's a statement of faith, because they don't want to say, well, maybe there was an intelligence here. I don't believe in proofs or anything like that. You know, I don't believe in proofs that God exists or proof that God doesn't exist. But the one thing that I know for a fact is that there is nothing in science that should stop you from having faith that you are a created being, and that your conscience and moral sense has a relationship with somebody, with another will in the universe. I think that science has gotten rid of a lot of superstition, as well it should, but I like to compare science to a bright light shown into the darkness. It illuminates what it touches, but it casts everything else into deeper darkness, and people who can't see or conjecture what's in that darkness, really no less than the people who let faith kind of illuminate the things that can't be seen in the natural world.
That's interesting. You know, one of the things that strikes me so much is you'll see this everywhere on the internet. I mean, you'll see it everywhere. People will talk, if the subject of science and religion comes up or whatever, or some religious contradiction or something is pointed out, people say, I don't believe in that nonsense, I believe in science.
Yeah.
When you hear somebody say, I believe in science, you realize, you're dealing with somebody who has no idea what science is.
Or religion, for that
It's really like saying, I believe in a hammer, or I believe in a scalpel, or I believe in an oscilloscope, or I believe in a telescope. What do you believe in? I believe in Jesus Christ. What do you believe in? I believe in a telescope. Because science is a series of, it is a way of thinking, it is a series of procedures to derive information from the natural world. Right. Science is the ability to isolate variables, to come up with a possible explanation, construct a series of tests, perform those tests under strictly controlled conditions, and when the results become fairly consistent over a large number of cases in different situations, all returning the same numbers, especially if they're returning the same numbers mathematically predicted by the theory, then you may be on to a little tiny piece of truth about how the universe is constructed. That is not a philosophy. In fact, scientific thinking, the ability to think scientifically, is also not a philosophy. It's a method of interrogation. It's a series of questions that you ask to get a specific answer out of nature, but that's not a worldview. So when people say, I believe in science, they're really trying to say something else. What I think they're trying to say, having come from this place, is they're trying to say that I believe in an objective, materialistic worldview that can be explained by scientific data that doesn't have any unbridgeable gaps that require the intercession of a creator. And when they say they believe in science, what they're really getting down to is, I believe in the Big Bang theory of creation, which has a 15 billion-year-old universe, a 4.5 billion-year-old solar system, a sedimentary evidence of evolution and evolutionary paths through time, and so on and so forth. All of which I absolutely believe in without any question whatsoever. There's no question. There's that much data, there's that much evidence. I think it has to be true. But where they stop is they stop at the belief that this is all there is. And what they're really saying, even though they don't realize it, is it has to be true because I understand it, and there can be no greater understanding than mine. And this is when we begin to really get kind of in the trans science world. The trans science world, the world beyond the people who say I believe in science, is a world that is also given to us by science, but it's a world where observing an outcome of an experiment changes not just the outcome of the experiment, changes in fact the structure of nature. That's right. That's beyond dispute scientifically. Yep. Observing something changes the outcome. That's a rather profound little insight. We know that all of our perceptions and all of our ability to see things is through a cocktail straw. The visual spectrum is a tiny spectrum of the total electromagnetic spectrum. How many things do we filter out in terms of traffic noises? We live in a very blinkered world. And when you started to get into some of these concepts, I think what we run into is we run into the limit of our human brains. We simply don't have the neurons to understand infinity and eternity. We don't understand them. When you talk to somebody about either an eternal God or an eternal universe, take your pick, they will always say, well, yeah, okay, what was before that? Well, there was nothing before that. Well, there had to be something before it. What was before it? No. What comes after it? Nothing comes after it. There's no after it. What's on the other side of the expanding universe? Nothing. You mean it's like a vacuum? No. There is no other side. Well, there has to be. If there's an inside, there has to be an outside. No. This is when we run out of neurons, in the same way that a sparrow cannot fly an instrument approach no matter how many times I train a sparrow to fly an instrument. Or my dog is never going to be able to fly an instrument approach. Hasn't got the neurons for it. And this is where I run into problems with people who say they believe in science. They don't understand the arrogance of it. They don't understand that their belief in an objectivism is a religion, and that has the same qualities of religion to the degree that heretics are burned, blasphemers are punished, certain people are held up as gods and worshipped. And you need to drop your arrogance and drop your preconceptions, because the true scientist is a person who understands how little they know.
Right, right. And you know, it takes, that scientism, that materialism takes out of the equation. It's always looking at the world from outside of human life. But there are things that only exist in human life that the scientists have a name for them. They call them qualia. You know, the fact that that I love my wife. You might be able to find some set of neurons that communicates that to me, but you can't talk about that. That experience only exists inside me, and its reality exists inside me. And after a certain period of time, I get to say, that's a real experience. That's a real experience. There's no science for that experience. You know, you can't touch that experience, and the experience of God is very much like that. And the one final thing I will say is, I've read a lot of these guys called the New Atheists, Sam Harris, and you know, Bill Maher, I guess, counts as one of them, and Christopher Hitchens and all this stuff. Their arguments are very bad.
Very bad.
I mean, and
do you actually believe in a talking snake? Yes, I do. Yeah. Therefore, religion is stupid.
Well, right. And you know, and Christopher Hitchens, I'm a great admirer of Hitchens, and their arguments are just bad. Harris will only argue with fundamentalists. He says that's what real religion is. And you think, like, you know, well, once you create the straw man, it's easy to set them on fire. But you know, they're people of great, you know, and in Scalia, one of the most intelligent men in the country, devout Catholic, you know. And I mean, I think that there are plenty of people who are dealing with a kind of religion that guys like Harris and Hitchens don't even begin to understand.
Correct. And when people like Bill Maher can dismiss 2,000 years of the greatest minds in history wrestling with their entire lives over issues.
Yeah, but they weren't Bill Maher. They weren't Bill Maher.
That's right. That's right. That's it, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, they weren't Bill Maher, because of course they couldn't see it. Then you begin to realize this. So the thing I would just close this argument with is to say this. Why don't you stop thinking about whether you look at the world religiously or scientifically, and why don't you make yourself understand that what you're actually trying to do is you're trying to understand the truth. You're trying to get to the nature of things.
Exactly.
And understanding the nature of galaxies requires a certain kind of thinking, and understanding the nature of the human heart just requires another kind of thinking. But both galaxies in the human heart exist, and the Andromeda Galaxy, for all its magnificence, is dead as a damn doornail.
Yeah.
It's dead.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right.
There you go. That's all we have time for today, but you can always leave your words, suggestions, comments, questions. We'll take expletives, even characters, very big, just general characters. Put them in there, we'll answer them for you. For Andrew Klavan and PJTV, I'm Bill Whittle. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.